Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1656. The topic is training and the title is, Are You Stretching Too Much? Ooh. So I had a new client reach out and we're reviewing what they did, and we've talked about their training, talked about their nutrition, and one of the aspects that came up was the amount of stretching that they've been doing. So they're a power lifter. They work out 5 days a week and regularly. Like, this is their world. This is what they do. They're actually very good power lifter. So they want to move on and get like an elite total and continue to try to move up from there. So they're pretty religious with their training, pretty consistent. So 5 workouts per week. They do roughly about 20 to 30 minutes of warm-up and stretching every workout. Now that's a little bit of a red flag because that's too much. You shouldn't need that much. Just FYI. So they do 20 to 30 minutes of stretching every workout, consisting of foam rolling when they first get in. Then they do some static stretches in certain positions for certain muscles. Then they do activation drills, and then they move into their warm-up for kind of like their major lift. So they spend 20 to 30 minutes prepping their body every workout 5 days a week. Then on the other 2 days, they do stretch routines that they find off YouTube or like different apps and stuff. Like there's Raw Mod, which is like a CrossFit based app. It doesn't have to be CrossFit, but anyhow, there's apps and different videos they find. About 20 minutes of stretching followed by 40 minutes of active recovery walks. And they say they do this religiously because they believe it helps, their mobility. So if they're outside, they'll do them. If the weather's crappy, they have a treadmill in their house. So they'll just do the walk while they're watching TV or doing something like that. So every day they're doing something. 7 days a week, they are doing something that's supposed to stretch tight muscles. This is not good. And part of the reason why is, how the hell are they getting so tight, in 24 hours? What are we doing to ourselves that's causing the muscles to feel like they have to be pried back open every 24 hours? So when we look at this, they said they've plateaued in their strength, and they're having some knee pains. Both of their knees hurt a little bit. And they knew a friend of a friend, reached out, so we started working together. Now, in this case like this, like what I'm hearing is they spend a lot of time trying to get their muscles open and ready to move, but then they get really freaking tight within 24 hours. It's like, what's happening? There's some thoughts to that. Are we under recovering? Like we have a greater stimulus than we have recovery, whether that's like through nutrition, sleep, time. It just takes more than 24 hours for muscles to heal. So what's going on in under recovery? We also look at, is there overcompensation, meaning the muscles are getting tight because they're being overused. They're the strong, dominant muscles, they're being overused. If so, we'd have to look at kind of addressing that. Or are the muscles getting tight because they're understimulated? Maybe they're the weak muscles, they're hiding under all the main lifts, the big muscles, and they're just getting cranked down and tight as the body's way to protect them. So those are kind of 3 focal points that I would look at when I start to ask questions or start to look at their information. Are we under-recovered? Are we overcompensating with these muscles? Or are we understimulated with the muscles that are getting tight? And what's interesting is they said that some muscles are tight, but some muscles they feel like are hypermobile. They don't have really any issues with certain muscles, and actually they feel like certain muscles are almost too mobile. And it's like, well, this is fun. I actually do love this kind of stuff because it can seem very confusing, but when you start kind of putting together the puzzle and looking at all the different aspects, it actually starts to kind of make more clear sense. So if we look at nutrition, that's typically the first place I'm going to look, actually before I even look at their programming, because nutrition, whether it's great, average, or bad, will dictate what is the appropriate amount of volume in training, what is the appropriate amount of intensity, what's the appropriate amount of frequency. So I can't really evaluate, like I can look at a program and just assume the person's eating okay and then I can evaluate the program. But I'd rather know exactly what the person's doing nutritionally, and then that gives me a better idea of how to evaluate programming. So if we look at their nutrition, they're very consistent. Like I said, this is their world. This is what they do. So calories, super consistent. They eat around body weight times 15, sometimes body weight times 16 on training days. But they eat body weight times 13 on non-training day in total calories. Now this person's very lean, 6-pack abs. Like, they want to continue to build muscle and get stronger, but they want to stay in their weight class. So they're already very lean, already packing in as much muscle as their weight class can handle. We're definitely going to get more on there because that's what I do. But they're very lean, so that's just helpful to know. And they consume about 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Now, if we look at this, body weight times 15 in general, and I'm going to just give you some generals here, is an average amount of calories. It's kind of like a maintenance level of calories. It's not really a building level of calories. It's not typically a fat loss amount of calories. It's just kind of like right in that happy little middle where you're just maintaining. Now, if you want to learn more about like exact numbers, like how do I know that, is we have our free nutrition education on our website. So if you go to brutalirongym.com, there's free nutrition education page. If you click on that, the first thing on there is create your own nutrition program, and it's a document that has a podcast that you can listen to. Direct link for a podcast. Podcast 1232, which talks to you all about what are the most important components of nutrition in ranking order, like priority order, and how to figure out the exact right amount of calories, amount of protein, how much, what your timing should be, how many grams of carbs, how many grams of fats, everything. So everything's in there. So that document that you can print or view if you want, it gives you the link for the podcast, and it gives descriptions on how to calculate all these numbers. So it's a create your own nutrition program, hence the title of the document. So you can write your own nutrition program if you want. Now, with that information in mind, the 1.5 grams of protein per pound is on the high end. That's a little over what I typically would recommend. But their calories are actually a little low. So body weight times 15 on a training day for a powerlifter is really low, actually. And body weight times 13 on a non-training day, but remember that their non-training day involves 20 minutes of stretching and a 40-minute after walk. That's underfeeding. So they're under-eating. It's helping them maintain their body weight. But what's happening is they have a high amount of protein. They have arguably not quite enough calories. But since the protein is high within the calories, that means their carbs and fats are very low. So they're under eating their energy nutrients, but in order to try to stay lean, but they're trying to compensate by overeating their protein. However, you have to have available energy to put that protein to use. Protein is what we build muscle tissue from. It's the material for muscle tissue. If I want a brick house, I have to have bricks. Okay? So it's the material for muscle tissue. But the process of actually building muscle tissue does require energy support. It requires caloric support via carbohydrates and fats. So you have the bricks for the house, but you don't have anybody to put the damn bricks into the house shape. So they have all the protein for the muscle, for the new muscles, but they don't have any carbs and fats that would be able to provide the energy for that protein to be converted over to new muscle tissue. So they're under eating their energy nutrients. So even though they have abundance of a protein available, they're not getting that abundance of actual muscle recovery. So they're slightly under eating. I would have them eat, and I will have them eat more more calories on training days and non-training days. I would bump those numbers up at least one. So instead of body weight times 15 on training days, we're going to go to body weight 16. And instead of body weight times 13 on non-training days, we're going to go to body weight times 14. We're going to see how their body responds in the first week or two. They might put on an extra pound or two, and that's just going to be mostly like just a little bit of water accumulation, because we're finally going to be able to address some of the under-recovered state. So that's going to cause some water retention as the body starts to actually do some work that it's been putting off, that it hasn't been provided enough energy to do. So the initial response could be a little bit of weight gain, Another condition is sometimes if somebody's chronically underfed, you get absolutely no response. Nothing seems to change because it's like throwing a penny down a well. They're not eating enough yet. So if we see that in a week or two, they have okay energy, but really nothing has changed, then we go to body weight times 17 and body weight times 50. So we bump those numbers up a little bit. And then again, we wait and see how does the body feel, how does the body respond. So overall, they are under recovered. So we are going to eat more food. Protein, they can leave the same. Typically, I would reduce the protein, but we're underfed. I don't need to make more room for calories. I just need to add more calories. So we're going to add the extra calories through carbs and fats, not protein. They're not adding any more protein. Now, the next thing we kind of look at is we would say, okay, are the tight muscles, are they tight because they're overcompensating for weaker muscles? Or are the tight muscles tight because they're weak and they're understimulated in training and they're not getting stronger, so they get tight to protect themselves and hide from pain, hide from the amount of work that they might have to do. Now, what's interesting is the person said that some muscles are hypermobile and some muscles are chronically tight. What this kind of says to me is their frequency of training isn't necessarily the problem because the whole body would be overly tight. Their intensity of training isn't probably the problem because, again, their whole body would be tight. And their training volume isn't probably the problem because their whole body would be tight. So when we see that there are some muscles that feel loosey-goosey and ready to go, but there are some muscles that are super tight, that typically means that we don't have to adjust training frequency, intensity, or volume. We more so have to look at what we're doing. So if you have the whole body feels tight, everything feels kind of stiff, then you would actually want to look at training frequency, intensity, and volume. Your whole program might be too much. So since they have some muscles that are okay, some muscles that are tight, we're going to look at those tight muscles. What I would look to do is to see, okay, the muscles that are tight, are they their dominant muscles? So when the person is doing like a deadlift, you would look at technique. Like I had one client, their deadlift position was an insanely aggressive, jolting yank off the floor. It was a conventional deadlift. They had really good leg drive, but it was basically a yanking explosion off the floor. And they said that their knees kind of hurt and their back kind of hurt. I'm like, yes, absolutely. Makes total sense. You're trying to shockingly absorb 500 plus pounds into your connective tissue instantaneously. And you're doing that every week for chronic weeks, like over and over and over again. So what was happening is they didn't build up enough tightness against the bar to get the muscle tissues and joints preloaded before the bar left the floor. So when they would just yank the bar off the floor, since they had a degree of knee bend to get a good leg drive, their knee joints were exposed. So the patella tendons were taking a shock force, like bam. Imagine instead of somebody handing you a 45-pound plate, they throw you a 45-pound plate. That's going to be more jolting to try to catch a 45-pound plate than to be handed a 45-pound plate, right? So that client, they were jolting off the floor. Their knees were having to absorb 500 plus pounds. They were forward on their toes because they were more so thinking of yanking the bar. So that made the knees even more exposed. And then their lower back hurt because, again, everything just kind of got like hyper loaded. The lower back went from not loaded whatsoever to being thrown 500 pounds. So if we look at that, I would say, okay, well, your knees hurt and your back hurts because you're loading all of the weight into those muscles. They're strong, like those joints, muscle/joints, the areas. How about that? So I said they're strong. That's what you're relying on. The person has no glutes and hamstrings. So we know that they're relying on their quadriceps and knees and their lower back. I said they're strong, but you're just beating the hell out of them. You're way too aggressive to them. So they're going to have issues, not from being weak. They're going to have issues from being strong, but being abused and overused. So what we would look at is for this person, are their tight muscles related to their strengths? If so, they're being overused. They would need to decrease direct work on those muscles and swap that training volume for weaker areas. So, for example, I took that deadlifter and I made him do eggshell deadlifts. And he hated me because they were absolutely awful, because they require you to maintain tension through the hamstrings and glutes, which he didn't have. So he was very grumpy that, like, oh my God, my deadlift went down like 150 pounds. This seems like a very horrible idea. Do you know what you're doing? And I'm like, yes, I know what I'm doing, but thank you for asking. So I explained it to him, and he was like, holy crap, like, this is so humbling. And I was like, it's okay, man. You know, like, it's better to find this weakness, take 6 months or whatever, you know, address it, build it up, get super freaking strong, and then blow your old PRs out of the water, than it would be to continue to try to yank on that bar and get nowhere in 2 years and be beat up and feel like crap. So I said it's actually mental strength to say, hey, I may need some help, and then be willing to go through that process. That's super mentally strong. Like, definitely don't beat yourself up. It's mental weakness to refuse to address your weaknesses. So it takes mental strength to say, okay, I recognize I probably have weaknesses, and I'm going to humble myself, like, not worry about the weight. I'm going to just focus on trying to strengthen these weaknesses so eventually I can be kick-ass and dominant and be amazing. So delayed gratification. But I really talked to him, and I was like, you're doing the right thing, and you're doing a mentally harder thing by saying, okay, I'm going to do everything I'm awful at until I'm not awful anymore, so the things I love can continue to grow and be explosive and be amazing. That's a huge life lesson, by the way, in all other areas of the gym, outside of the gym. But that's an idea of overcompensation. The muscles are tight because they're dominant muscles. The other thing we look at is muscles can be tight because they're weak. So one of the ways that the body protects weak muscles is it basically creates this underlying degree of flexion and tension to protect the muscle from being overstretched under load to the point where it can be weak that it gets hurt. So if you think of a bicep, if I hand you a 20-pound dumbbell and I tell you to hold it at the top of the bicep curl, and I said, okay, I want you to slowly lower that weight. You might say at 20 pounds, you're like, okay, I can do that. I can accept a stretched position of my bicep under weight load. But if I hand you an 80-pound dumbbell and I tell you, okay, go ahead and slowly lower that, you're going to say, screw you. I have to keep this thing flexed at the top to even be holding against this weight. Or if I were to eke out some like openness in the muscle, I have to just completely let go and let it fall. Because if I tried to maintain tension, it would hurt. It would tear the muscle, or I would get hurt. So the body recognizes that weak muscles, when under load, if overstretched, can get damaged. So they create tension and flexion to hold the muscle from being overstretched. That tension and flexion is the tightness that the person feels when they're trying to do stretching. And that's also why it cranks back up. It's possibly why it cranks back up in tightness, because it needed to protect it. So if you notice that when we typically stretch muscles, it's not under weight load, and we tend to stretch them just against our body weight or just like very minimal, if any, weight load. So the body is more willing to open up and release that tension. But then you go train it, and then it cranks right back into tightness. So if a muscle is weak, it makes sense that it would turn back on in tightness immediately within 24 hours and be the problem over and over and over and over. They can get it to open up when it's unloaded in static stretching and warm-up routines, but then it cranks right back because of the stress of the workout. Now, what typically happens in this case is we need more direct loading of that tissue, but we need it in lower intensities. So the person is opening that tissue, but then they're throwing that tissue under a weight load that the body feels like it needs to protect itself again. We need less aggressive, crazy stuff that involves those muscles, and we need more isolative, more directive training, but under correct weight loads, like moderate to lighter weight loads, and then do progressive overload over time. So you have to actually almost kind of like treat it like a bodybuilding muscle. You have to give it a minimal stimulus that will get some adaptation, and then you repeat that week by week by week by week to build that muscle back up. So it often requires that somebody gets more creative. They have to do more exercise variety. They have to find movements and positions that they haven't been doing. So it involves a little more work to try to isolate that muscle out into like an isolative exercise rather than a compound exercise. But you have to load it very light. The idea is what's the minimum threshold that I will get an adaptive response? Not the maximum, the minimum. What's the minimum threshold of stimulus that I would need to get a response? So if I can do, like say for example the bicep curl, if I'm doing a bicep curl with 20 pounds, or I could do a bicep curl with 30 pounds, but they're both going to feel challenging to the muscle. One's going to be a little more slow, a little controlled, a little more focused on contraction, release. The other one I'm going to be kind of heaving it around. I want to go with the lighter one, focus on my muscle connection, and be nice to the muscle while beating it up. So you want to get the muscular stress, but you don't want to have crappy form and overload it and beat the crap out of it, basically. You want to be nice to it while you're being mean to it, not be mean to it while you're being mean to it. But those are the things that I would look at in cases like this, is if we think about what is the appropriate amount of stretching, it really takes about 10 minutes of workout. And I don't think of it as stretching as much as I think of it as movement preparation. When I come into the gym, if I've been sitting all day at a computer or I've been running around doing odds and ends, we're unlikely to be in our best state. And especially for movements such as like a squat, where you have to go from, say, standing to really weak and odd positional angles of the body. So you think of a parallel squat. That's an odd position for the hips, the knees, the adductors, even the lower back. When in your regular life are you bent down into a position of a regular squat? Not too often. So if I'm coming into the gym, I probably haven't been in that position since I squatted last. So my muscles have gotten a little tight to be protective and to adjust for the movements I am doing. So I really want to get into the gym, and I just want to prepare my body to move through the ranges of motion that I need that day. So movement preparation, that's the way that I would think of it. What do I need to do to just feel like I can move properly through a full range of motion of a squat? Or if I'm doing bench press, or if you have sumo deadlift, because that's more demanding on the hips than say like a conventional deadlift. But I just need to move myself and get ready for the positions I'm going to use in the workout. So it's movement preparation. That really should only take about 10 minutes, plus or minus a couple minutes. But you shouldn't be spending 20, 30 minutes. It's just unnecessary. I would argue that a good bit of what you're doing is either redundant or it's just like not necessary. Like you've already done 2 or 3 things for that muscle. You don't need this extra thing. Or it's completely unrelated to what you're trying to do that day, so you don't even need to do it. Just a lot of issues if it's taking 20, 30 minutes. So we have podcast 1112. It's a training podcast titled The Best Warm-Up Routine, and I talk through what are the focal points that you would want for a proper warm-up. It's something for the thoracic spine, like overall shoulder health, something for core, something for hips, and then you move on. Those are going to be kind of the 3 main areas. You go through about 10 minutes of a little circuity stuff for that, and then you move on. So if you want to listen to that, figure out what the perfect warm-up routine is for you, how to personalize it, podcast 1112. Then we also have, if you want to see what proper programming looks like in regards to frequency, intensity, volume, including movements that address like overcompensation, undercompensation, all that stuff. We do have our live monthly programming service, and we do have a powerlifting program, if that's what you're into. But we have our live monthly programming service. What that is it's a subscription service. You get brand new programming every 4 weeks. And it's based on whatever topic you want. We have powerlifting or power building, which is you just eat extra food and you build muscle while you're getting stronger. Then we have female shape development, pure bodybuilding, functional athleticism, which is like military prep, firefighter, first responder, that kind of stuff. And then functional longevity, which is basically how to be strong, be able to move yourself around, but avoid a lot of the common aches and pains of weightlifting. So those are our 5 program focal points. You get brand new programs every 4 weeks. Every exercise has a video tutorial. But what my favorite part of this service is you get 24/7 access to ask me any questions you want. So you can ask absolutely any question you want and you will get an answer. Personalized answer, not a bullshit answer that I copy and paste to everybody. It's a personalized answer. So it's a really cool service. You get brand new programming every 4 weeks to the topic you want, and you get to ask me any questions you want ever. And they can be questions about anything. Everything. So I love it, love it, love it. That service is only $50 a month. There's no contract. You can cancel anytime. But it's a really cool opportunity to get great programming and get to ask a lot of questions and improve your education when it comes to training, programming, nutrition, just how to manage, blending healthy nutrition and training into your lifestyle. We talk about anything and everything that people want to put in that document. Okay, so there's the ways you can get help. If you want, you can listen to podcast 1112, learn about the best warm-up routine. That'll tell you the right amount of stretching you should do every day for your training program and whatnot. And then if you want some programming options, we do have that live monthly programming. So that's what I would look at. If you're struggling with tight muscles, chronically tight muscles, you're either under-recovered through nutrition, sleep, or training too much, frequency, volume, intensity based on your nutrition, or you're overcompensating with those muscles, which is why they're tight, or they're understimulated, they're weak, and they're hiding and they're not being trained directly enough. Okay, so if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, let me know. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like today's podcast, please share it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people we can help. That's the whole point of doing it. And then thank you to those who donate to support the podcast. It does have a high hosting cost to be on all the different platforms throughout the year, so I appreciate the donations as they help cover some of that cost. You can donate on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. Even just $5 a month, $10 a month, anything you can give adds up a little bit, and it definitely helps. I appreciate everyone who donates. It truly actually does help to make it not so chaotic for me financially to do this. I love doing it, so I'm going to try to do it as long as I can, but I do appreciate the donations as they help make that just a little bit easier. And then if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram and YouTube. Find us and follow us under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.